Hey, what's up, everybody? Great to see you. Little different this week on Lion's Guide for the Flipside of Leadership. It's me, Flip, coming to you from. I'm in a hotel room, and we're not going to be able to do this on a streamcast live, so I'm going to pre-record it for everybody as I am out with some business and some family things, but having a good time. I wanted to come to you anyways. I want to give you something. Luckily, this month we have a fifth Thursday. So in the last fifth Thursday, I got to kind of start the tradition and what I plan on keeping and you may have seen it on the promotions, is I want to do the mentorship files. People that have really kind of influenced me from afar and that I watched and learned from, I would say, that really influenced my life. And I was able to take their lessons and kind of boil them down. The first time I did it, I got to do it with General Powell, who is Secretary of State Powell, who is sadly no longer with us. He was a big influence, and his 13 rules are ones you can literally still, and it's hard not to promote it. You could take those right now, and you could easily become a better leader in one day just by implementing some of those leadership lessons that Powell left us with and taught us. But today, very excited for probably one that was a little bit more influential to me when I was in the military, because I served under him while he was there. I was fortunate enough to do that. We were actually in the Middle East at the same time. I did not meet him. I have a good friend that actually worked underneath him. But that is, and as you probably have already seen, that is the Secretary of Defense, 4-star Marine General, James Mattis, right? Mad Dog, as they say, or whatever he was. Call sign was Chaos. You're going to hear me a lot today referencing a couple books by him. One is Call Sign Chaos. So for everybody, it's there. My screen's coming up weird. And the other one is this one, which is No Better Friend, No Worse Enemy. That's also by Mattis. And they are two books that are great. I got to dive deep into them when I was finishing up my second degree on military leadership, organizational leadership, and I used him actually as a centerpiece for a thesis that I wrote. And I learned a ton. And I think I took 5 lessons from that I want to share with you today. And again, as easy as implementing Powell's 13, I think you can implement Mattis's these 5 anyways, somehow, some way into your leadership style, into your organization, into your team, and you would easily have a better team just immediately with that. So I won't get too deep into it. Those of you who don't know Mattis, obviously he was the Secretary of Defense under then President Donald Trump. He was a 4-star Marine Corps general, almost 40 years, I believe. And he was someone while he was also maverick, very maverick, he said some stuff that I think probably he would look back and he knew, even in his books he referenced, he got a little bit in trouble from doing that. But he was he was a warrior professional when you look at it, right? He was a person who had gone and fought in Iraqi freedom. He was there for Afghanistan. He was priorly there before for Kuwait. And so he knew about that area. He knew about warfare. He created his own warfare, which was maneuver warfare. And he launched those at the training centers when he got back, and he really changed the face of the Marine Corps in some respects when he had done that. And so that was things. But the first thing that I think I'll do a recap at the end where I think these all fit together. You will hear them a lot when I give presentations of how I've adapted them, because I think they're easy to adapt, and you'll see that. But I think also that it is something that you can kind of take with you, right? You can put them in kind of your own toolbox, if you will, and use them pretty easily. So let's talk about the first one. The first one is being brilliant on the basics. So what does that mean? So to Mattis, he had seen the chaos that had happened during war, and he knew that because when we talk later on, we're going to talk about him being a voracious leader. He read and understood about how things were going to happen, or at least he had a good mindset. He may have not known what was going to happen when he was doing, when he was actually involved in the war and going through places and running through Kuwait and going in all the places, but he knew things were going to boil down to sometimes the simplest of terms. And I think we can all look at that when the proverbial crap hits the fan. What does your organization boil down to? What do you boil down to, right? What is your core? What are your basics that you're going to do? And Mattis's core for him was that his Marines that were underneath his command, and as many people as he could influence, we were going to be brilliant on the basics, right? And if you're a Marine, every Marine is a rifleman. So those core things were going to be what was good. And wherever he went, they potentially could be different, right? He had something, he had things called flat ass rules that he meant for when he went over there. And there were 3 rules that he picked out for that group that he was with, and that all of his troops, Marines, knew this is what they were going to be. But he was a stickler on being brilliant on the basics. And I think that is a fundamental flaw that sometimes we get caught up in as leaders, is that we have all these expectations on people. We hire them to do different things and add stuff to their plate. And we forget about being just, look, you need to be good at what you're good at, right? Like that, don't ever not be that piece of the puzzle. And for him, his Marines needed to be riflemen. That's what they needed to be first and foremost. And there was a lot more that he added to that every single time he went out. But he wanted to make sure that his troops were being brilliant on the basics. Absolutely not even close to being ironic. He pulled that from someone else, and that was George Washington back in the day. George Washington said his troops had to be, right? He was fighting a war. He was under logistics at that time were really bad. And so he needed his people to be, brilliant on the basics of warfare back in the Revolutionary War. And so Mattis learned that from Washington. He learned those problems that he had faced. And guess what? Warfare was no different. Just because the technology was different, right? They had horses and swords and muskets, and now we have what? We have planes and we have drones, but it didn't matter. Like when it boiled down to it, you were going to have. I needed you to be brilliant on the basics, right? We always used to say in medicine, right? We had doctors who had all kinds of trauma surgeons that were in hospitals, and they can do all these types of stuff. But the funny thing is that when we took them out into the field and we eliminated all the fancy equipment, you had to be brilliant on your basics, right? ACLS, advanced cardiac life support, when I was in, and we were experts at that for being on that piece. To start a heart and to keep somebody alive, the basics is doing CPR, right? It wasn't about what we learned that through the war of saying, look, that's why Combat Lifesaver came on board. That's why, every Marine had their own individual first aid kit and IFAC, because saving lives was doing the basics as fast as you could correctly versus getting them. Now, there was absolutely reason to get people back to higher levels of care when it came to medicine, but Mattis knew, hey, his maneuvers were going to be simple. He knew he had to be fast. He knew he had to be agile. He knew he had to, crush his enemies with overwhelming power so that they never wanted to come out of their holes again and do anything and resist America. And his basis to all that was being brilliant on the basics. And you can completely adopt that, right? If you take your business and you say, what are we good at? We will always be. When I think of brilliant on the basics, I start to think about when you have someone who is what does your company do the best? And what do the people at your company do to support that best thing, right? And that's their basics. Their basics lead to your basic as a company. Don't get too spread out as a company. Always go back to brilliance, because when it hits the fan, what do you do the best? What do I need you to do the best? And for Mattis, that was simple, right? I needed you guys to do whatever that was, what it was, right? In a nutshell, a Marine is a rifleman first, and so everybody was a good shooter, right? And so that was number one. So if you read any of the books, if you research Mattis, I think you're going to find that brilliant on the basics piece you can absolutely. And listen, I've used it for my daughter. I've talked about her before. She's a Olympic development level goalkeeper. She's one of the best in the state if not across the nation. And, I've told her, I said, look, all this extra stuff that you're going to start to learn to do and everything else, you can't, it's your footwork, it's your hands, right? And it's communication, your basics to the position. So everybody can look at that. And that was in soccer, by the way, of being able to do that. And I said, look, you continue to make sure that those basic things are done, and you can do that with employees, right? Make sure that your employees are getting what they need to make sure that they're experts in the basis of what their jobs are and what your company is. And that's one way to look at leadership, and leadership as well, right? So now look in and look self-reflecting. What are my core things that I'm going to stay good at and make sure that I'm really good at with my people, right? Whether that's communication, whether that's HR, if you're that focused, whether it's making sure that just what are your basics for those things and make sure that you're brilliant at. So that's number one that I think you can learn about from. The second one that I thought that was really good is called commander's intent. Now, for civilian folks, commander's intent, it's really simple. The CO, the commanding officer, says something, and he makes sure, and in Mattis's case, he made sure all the way down to the most junior Marine knew, most of the time from his mouth, knew his intent. What were we there to do? What were we supposed to do? What did I expect them? Whatever that was. And I think that's important, right? That's important. We talk about CEOs who have a vision and who are consistent about that vision, because again, and you're going to hear this a lot, when crap hits the fan, and it was going to, and in war, you could admittedly say, look, when bullets are flying by, I want you to think about my commander's intent of making sure that you're not trying, or you're doing everything possible to keep civilians away from the casualty, right? You're responding with force that was equal to the force given to you, right? Or whatever that was, enough to get the job done. Those commander's intent that he had put out, and the way that he emphasized it all the way down his chain of command, and you could say cross-organizationally for civilian folks, that's important, right? And you being strong leader, right? And then here's the best part. Parts of leadership now we move down from, like, let's say the CEO to the C-suite, to the department heads, to the division officers, or in this case, your mid-level managers, to your night shift, right? Whatever it was, they're all preaching the same thing. That's important about commander's intent, right? Is that everybody's on the same page, everybody's clear. It could be, this is a great example, right? It could be rush hour at the pizzeria. And we know our number one goal isn't to get fancy. Our goal is to put out a great product, period. That's it. And so even during, our rush hours, and we've got pizzas because it's our number one goal and our number one commander's intent is that we're going to put out quality pizza every single time. If it's not that way, we're not going to give it to our customers, right? That could be your commander's intent, and it comes straight from the founder, from the owner, but it's simple to do. This is what we're good at, right? And then now go back to the thing. You're going to carry out commander's intent by being brilliant on your basics during that time of chaos, right? If that makes sense. So I think it is prevalent across Mattis's thing, right? And in the military, for those that don't know, there is a strong sense of chain of command, right? It is there for a reason. It is there, right? And it's not that you can't question, right? Because you're sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's not, right? We can't do that. But very few times, and war is one of those times where you may not have time to question something. It may not be that way, right? And I know different services work a lot differently. Some are very much unquestioned. You do not. That is unacceptable. But in general, right? If you're learning something, or you're given an order, right, you can add that commander's intent and say, hey, that's not what the commander wanted when he intended for us to do this, right? And it's kind of, you can use that to make some of your decisions, right? If you think about that too in that way, right? If your employees, or in this case, the military folks who were out there on the battlefield and they were running into situations that were going to be, maybe put them in ethical dilemmas or moral dilemmas, whatever that was, they could always think about that commander's intent, or they should have thought about that commander's intent and said to themselves, hey, I know what this person wanted and what his intention was for us to be. He can't give us every scenario. You're not going to be able as a leader to put yourself into every single situation, right? Because of, let's take diversity, for example. Let's take all the changes and the pivots that we're facing in this world as a business person, as whatever, and say, okay, I can't be there for every single decision that my people are going to make. So what do? I'm going to make sure that everybody knows our intention to be, and that's to be the best, whatever, right? Reality capture company in the country, or whatever it is. And we're going to make those decisions to make sure that that's what we're aiming towards and that's what we're going to be. And Mattis taught that to his people. And I think that's a super important second one to talk about. And it's not unlike a CEO having a mission, a vision, a vision and guiding principle saying, hey, this is how we work for that kind of piece of it all. All right, third one, let's get on to this. So this one's not as familiar, and I think even my military folks, most of them may not have heard about this one. I dug deep into it. I had to, and it was one I brought out that was kind of one of those hidden gems that I dusted off and found. And this is called Skip Echelon Leadership. And he got it, surprisingly, from a British field general named Marshall Slim. And what it really entails is a couple principles it's a very mature way about leadership, and there can't be a lot of room. There has to be a lot of trust in order to enact it. But if you want to talk about speeding up process and smoothing things over, Skip Echelon is a way to do that, right? And if you're in a high level position as a leader and you need information that's not filtered, right? And we'll talk about sometimes that how it gets filtered, but Skip Echelon is what you can able to do. And so what did it require? For him on the battlefield, and then this may not fit this way in civilian sectors, but he had staff reduction, right? His staff that he took with him to battle, he got rid of a lot of them. He didn't need them. And he said, it's just, we don't need to take this many people. We need to be able to be mobile. We need to be able to be near the front line. This was a part of it. The others, the main piece of this was that he wanted orders to come straight from the source, right? So a lot of times in military leadership, you have the general that asks a question. Then you have the colonel, or in our case, I'll do it Navy-wise. The admiral asks a question. He asks the captain of the air wing, and the captain of the air wing asks the squadron commander. Squadron commander asks the lieutenant commander who was on the flight, and he speaks for the crew that flew the SAR mission, right? And now you're getting all these filtered layers throughout and trying to think. So what happens with that? And we all know this, human nature kicks in. I want to look good. I'm trying to make the next rank. There's all this kind of convoluted stuff. I'm trying to get a better job. I'm trying to get that person's job, whatever that is. And so those things can kind of convolute the information getting to the top. Well, Mattis said, I'm at war. I don't want that. So what did he do? He reduced his staff, and he would call people directly, right? He would call the captain, which is a very low-ranking person in the not low-ranking, but it's probably the most junior officer that was out there on the battlefield on the patrols. He was calling captains saying, what does it look like on the ground? What's the information? Because what he didn't want is he didn't want that captain to relate it back to the major back at their tactical operations center, who related to the colonel, and now all of a sudden the colonel's the only one that can talk to the general. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to hear it straight from the captain's mouth of what was really going on. And we've seen this in business, right? Take major businesses, and they don't talk to the people that are, let's say it's a I don't know, maybe it's a ham company, right? And so that ham company, they don't listen to their managers maybe on the ground about what needs to happen at Christmas, or what needs to happen, or what's better for the company, right? They're making decisions way up at the top, and they're not listening to that kind of piece. Well, Skip Echelon tells you, listen, the people to go to are the people on the ground who are going to give you the best insight so you could make the best decision, right? So I'll give you a great example of how we used it. Again, chain of command is very structured in the military, but here's something that I used to do. And for my military folks, especially Navy, you'll understand this, and you may even gasp that I did it. But I thought it was important. The jump from E6 to E7 in the Navy, going from a first-class petty officer to a chief petty officer, was very big. And I've talked about this before. It's probably one of the biggest jumps you could make in any of the enlisted services whatsoever. You get new uniforms. You do a 45-day leadership initiation, where you learn about time management and you learn about history and all kinds of things, right? And you're inundated with time management problems that you have to deal with, and you may not have been keeping yourself physically fit because you're in these very high stressful environments as a first class at the top, right? You're a lot of heavy laden, I would say, HR and kind of process. You're kind of inundated. That's you may have kind of slacked off a bit. But here's the thing. I used to go to, as I was the command master chief, which was a E9, the highest enlisted person. I was in what we used to call the triad of the command. So it was me, the executive officer, the top three. It was the E suite, right? If you would look at, there's the C suite, excuse me. And here's what I used to do. I used to go to my first class mess meetings, and I used to tell them the exact same information from my lips that I would tell at my chiefs meetings. But I told my chiefs, I said, hey, chiefs, I'm going to go to those meetings and I'm going to tell them stuff. And a few of them looked at me the first time and they were like, well, isn't that my job? Isn't it my job to do that? And I told them, I said, listen, I said, I need to hear the information from the ground, from them about what's going on. I said, it's not that I don't trust, it's that I need to hear it, because they may say it a different way to you than they say it to me, right? And they may still say it different to me, right? And so I didn't want to do that. And I told the chiefs, I said, look, I'm not undercutting you. I still want you to carry out everything. You still have full control of your divisions and your departments and everything that you did. I said, I'm just going to go to them once a week, or once a month is actually what I ended up doing. And I would just talk to them about stuff. And in those days, I would put the exact same information out that I had at the chiefs meeting, but they heard it from me, right? And that was a big deal, because to me, that's how I integrated skip echelon, right? I was hearing things from the ground level to be able to understand, right? So take someone who is a new hire at your company, and you want to hear directly from them, right? And that's hard for leaders. I had a leader when I first got out that hadn't talked to the new hire in a long time. And the expectation was that the new hire was just like kind of the division and department leads, and that was not the case, right? And luckily, I was already senior as a person, and I could be able to say, I don't know that stuff. This isn't. You're not talking to, a senior project manager here. You're talking to, the new guy, right? And so, it can be tough. It can be tough to do. And it could be, it could lead to mistrust sometimes, but if everybody's on the same page and you're honest, transparent, consistent about your message, about what it is, you can pull that. And then that information right now, it's not filtered up through you as a leader. Now you're getting the raw information that you need. And a lot of times you find out stuff that you don't know, right? We've all done that. Hey, let me handle, and what you can't do is, if you find something out, when you do skip echelon and you miss, you take away people and you get the ground level view, you can't go back then, right? Unless they're obviously egregious, but you can't go back and just flame spray that middle section, right? Because what you got to be able to do is, you got to be able to, one, if you're there with the junior folks, you got to be able to talk to them and then come back and say, hey, I heard your problems. We're going to work on that, right? Because a lot of times, look, middle management, they got a lot on their plates. They got things from the top. They got things from the bottom that they're worried about. Middle management tends to be some of the hardest things to deal with. So a lot of things may not get through up to your level, right? Handled at the lowest level, right? So again, it's got to be open communication. It's got to be transparent. It's got to be consistent, right? Because as you like to know, and as all my fans know, listen, that builds that trust, that loyalty, and that, right, and that respect. So, but skip echelon, from what Mattis taught, he did it great. Obviously, he's a 3-star, so he could say, I can do what I want. And I don't care if I'm calling those, but he didn't. He told them why that was important to do. He told them that he needed the most updated, grittiest information to make his decisions, because that's what he thought about. So again, that's the third one, skip echelon. So far, right, we got being brilliant on the basics. We've got making sure that we have clear commander's intent, from the head person, and then being able to implement a very mature leadership kind of stance, which was skip echelon, right? So those are those three. So what's another one? So this was more of something he said, but it came out to be a lesson, and that's engage your brain before you engage your weapon. That was part of his commander's intent, right? But I called it out on its own specific, because to me, whether it's a weapon, what is your weapon, right? Your weapon could be, you are a lead capture person. You're going out on the phone to talk, right? What does engage your brain mean? It may be prepare. Prepare before you go out and pick up that phone and make those things, right? Don't do things just on impulse alone. Make sure that you're thinking about most things in life. You get a second to be able to make decisions. Obviously, he's talking about war, right? Do I shoot? Do I not? They were following rules of engagement out there. Don't shoot unless you're shot at first, right? One of those things, return fire, right? That was the rule of engagement that they were had to follow under. Well, guess what? You can totally take that into the thing. Here's a great one for everybody. A weapon could be email, right? And everybody's heard about this, and everybody's probably done it. You send an email out and you fire it off because you're pissed off about something. Now that weapon, what just happened? That was a grenade. You just fired, electronic grenade, and it just blew up all around the office. Or you hit reply all to something that you shouldn't have hit reply all to, right? So engage that brain, take a breath. One of the things that I used to love doing was I used to bring someone in and go, hey man, how does this sound? Read this email for me over my shoulder and tell me how it sounds. And they'd be like, damn, are you pissed off? And I was like, no, that's what that sounds like. And I'm like, oh, okay. Delete, right? Rewrite it again, right? Another way I used to do this too is I used to tell people all the time, engage your brain, especially in this sense, was people, sailors who hadn't been away from home much, right? All the information they were getting, I used to tell them, multiply that by the miles we're away from them, right? And then reduce it to say it's not as bad as multiplied as that, because that's the way we took it. Everything that we took that we got an email from, we were like, oh my God, right? You can't, what happened to it's okay. It's good, right? So engaging our brain and thinking about things and taking a breath, right? See, people say sleep on stuff, right? Weapons can be anything. In this case, Mattis was literally talking about shooting, but your weapon can be a ton of stuff to use, right? How about just firing back on someone who may be having a bad day, if you don't know they're having a bad day and you may want to crack the joke, right? Something like that. Like, you can use it in so many different ways to be able to do this. So it's something to do. Oh my gosh, stop gun theme going off. I didn't even put my phone on mute. So hold on one second. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So what else do we have? So engaging your brain before you engage your weapon. Absolutely, very much something to think about and something to do. I apologize to my viewers for that one. Being away from home has its own challenges. So what's the last one? The last one's pretty interesting. It's being a lifelong learner. I learned it from Mattis. I'll be honest with everybody. It really kicked me in to reading. It really kicked me into looking at stuff. There are numerous accounts. I've given you a couple. Brilliant on the Basics, he learned from Washington. Skip Echelon, he learned from Field Marshal Slim. He has learned so much from other people. And being a lifelong learner, I think, is so important, because what you're able to do is you are able to take other people's experiences and be able to implement them to what you have, right? So whatever those are and what they were, Mattis was reading about war. He was reading about Marcus Aurelius. He was reading about Bonaparte's invasion. He was reading about being in Afghanistan and the Russians he was reading all those things, because before he went, he wanted to know, because all the same principles apply. So one of the biggest things I think I've learned was when I went to the Naval War College and went to the Senior Leadership Academy. We got into a room with all of my peers, and we were talking about, hey, what issues do you have in your specific warfare area? My I could cover 2 warfare areas. I could cover Navy medicine, and I could talk also about aviation. And what I found incredibly, I mean, it fascinated me to no avail, was the aviation world and the submarine world couldn't have been any different on the outside, right? Couldn't have been any different. You had people underneath the water and you had people in the air, right? The truth was, you had, for flight status and for submarine status, you had to have almost the identical physical, which was pretty interesting, right? You had to be pretty sane to go underneath the water for that, and you had to make sure that you were sane to fly in the air, right? And healthy. But what I didn't realize from a maintenance standpoint, I didn't realize that the submarine force had 40-year submarines that they had to work with and make maintenance on. And we had old aircraft to do the same thing that we were obviously using a lot of. So it was really interesting to see the similarities. Being a lifelong learner, reading about people's issues that they had, those issues, history repeats itself. We all know this, right? And so being able to go back and look at this and say, oh, this was super interesting. One I wanted to read straight from because I thought it was interesting. Shout out to all my senior enlisted out there who I love you. When Mattis was young, he was summoned. Basically, a CMC said to him, he said, sir, right? And Mattis is young at the time. He's probably 27, lieutenant or captain. He said, you're a very pervasive young man, he said to him. This is the CMC, the senior enlisted. He said, handing me a book about a Roman centurion, but it would be best if you did your homework first. So here's what he was telling him. I mean, Mattis got his kind of lifelong learning lesson from an older, salty, senior enlisted person that said to him, hey, you're going to be someone who's powerful and someone who can make things happen and do great things and lead us in wars. He saw that senior enlisted person saw him back then. And he told him, go learn. Here's a book about a Roman centurion. And that set Mattis off. It was notorious that when Mattis went around on the battlefield, he always carried a box full of books with him, and he read those books. He will tell you considerably. He listened to Marcus Aurelius almost every night. He read about him every night and what he was thinking about. But being a lifelong learner is something that we all can do. It doesn't need to be about a degree. It doesn't need to be about, right? It needs to be about development. Where do you learn? Where do you continue to hear things, right? I try to do it daily. I try to learn from new people. I brought Laura. Obviously, people know Laura and Dale on the Lions Guide here. I've brought them on, and I'm learning about their lessons, right? I'll plug Laura's book, right? Sirens, How to Pee Standing Up. And, I listened to it on my drive. I've been driving. It was great to hear her insight for those things. Well, Mattis does that too, right? Mattis reads, and he talks about being a lifelong learner. And when you think about that, I think sometimes people get scared off to say, well, does that mean I have to go get a degree, or does that mean I have to pay $2,000 for a course? It doesn't mean that at all, right? It doesn't even mean having to read a book necessarily, although that's where you're going to find most of it, right? Get an Audible. You may find yourself, you have tons of extra time on a drive home or something. Like I used to have 45-minute commutes. I had more books done when I was in Maryland than anywhere because I had 45-minute drives to and from. Man, I was crushing books left and right, learning and reading about kind of different people. That's how I learned about Bob Iger. That's how I learned about Powell, right? So there's ways to be creative about learning. It doesn't just need to be about, right, reading a book necessarily all the time. There's so many extra ways that we can be lifelong learners in this case, to be professionals in what we do. Because if you get stuck doing the things over and over and over again, what are you going to end up doing? You're going to end up plateauing, right? You're going to end up plateauing, or you're going to end up, kind of down. And that's not where we want to be. That's not what the growth is. That's not what Lions Guide's all about. We're about empowering people to be better, high performers and their leadership development skills. And Mattis is a great example of that, right? He's a great example of someone who was looking at tacticians of the people that he was emulating in ways and learning their lessons. And by the way, these weren't just like good lessons like we've talked about. He learned also about how did they fail? What were the obstacles that were going into things, right? So it's a preparation thing that you need to be. You've heard everybody before talk. You all heard me talk before about what color is the pen when you walk into a room, right? The pen isn't just a black pen, right? It's a felt tip. It's right. It's a double click. It's on sale. You can get it on Amazon in a 5-pack, right? All those things. It's fine point. It's V5. All those things. What is that about? That's about learning. It's about doing a little bit of research on stuff and learning about what your craft is or whatever it is. And Mattis taught me that. And I think that's a great lesson to pull from Mattis, from that, of being a lifelong learner. And I challenge my chiefs. One of the things I started to give out at the end was, and if you know me, I buy a lot of people books. I think books are, there's tons for me to end up doing. There's tons of little, look at, you're not going to read an entire book this thick and every single page to you is going to matter, right? You're gonna do what we do, right? And I know, Dale does it too. We highlight, I know we can't see, but we highlight little parts that are known. I write in my books, right? These are not books I can turn probably back in, right? And so they're books that you find stuff in, and then how does it relate to your life? And that's what being a lifelong learner is, right? It's about reading something, and don't be scared to be able to learn something, or don't believe that you're stuck in a siloed place, that other people aren't having the same issues through different ways, because guess what? They are. I promise you that other people have the same problems as you, whether that's HR stuff as a leadership, whether that's a small business struggling because of whatever it is, supply chain logistics, right? People are, but if you don't go out and learn about it, right? Join a group, join a small business association, talk to people, learn about their problems. That's lifelong learning. That's what Mattis talks about, right? He had his group of generals he could go to. He had his mentors he could go to for those things. So it's not just about a typical, I have to pick up a book and read it, and it has to be about the subject that I know about. That's not how it works, okay? It definitely works differently than that. All right, so today, again, I apologize not being able to be there with everybody today and be able to see your comments on the side. I am sorry for and yes, I'm using a Top Gun theme for my thing right now. I was a Top Gun fan, and no, I have not seen it. So please, nobody, when this comes out tomorrow, please, nobody text me or write me on LinkedIn as to what happened. I'm excited to see it on a date night when I get back. But listen, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Again, for Mattis, to me, it was almost as important as Powell. I'm glad I learned about him. I'm glad I got to research on him. I'm glad he was our Secretary of Defense. I'll be very honored, or be very honest. When you're there, he's probably the only one that I was like, it really hit me that I get to serve under him. I'll be completely honest. Out of all my service, I was honored to be able to serve under him while he was there, and realizing that we were in Iraq at the same time as well, in the CENTCOM area. I didn't know it at the time, but I thought that was pretty interesting for myself. I know people who have met him. I've heard about kind of things. But remember, being brilliant on the basics, number one, right? What are you guys good at? And are you good at that all the time, especially when it hits the fan, right? Having your intent about what you're doing, making sure that, hey, what I'm saying is coming from my mouth. And when stuff does hit the fan, think back on this if you need to make a decision when I'm not there, right? That was number two. Skip echelon, right? It's a mature thing, but sometimes as a leader, you're going to need to get the most grittiest details you can from people. And sometimes that's going around some of your mid-level leaders or people that you have charged to lead, and that's fine. It's okay, right? As mid-level leaders, cool, no big deal. The boss wants the information because they need to make these hard decisions. It's got to happen, right? Do that, make sure that happens. Engaging your brain before you engage your weapon, right? Whatever that is. We use the example of the email, right? Make sure have somebody look over your server before you fire and forget that email that's going to be that way, or whatever, right? Take a moment to think about things before you go off and do them, whatever that is, right? Even if you've done it 1,000 times, every once in a while, gut check yourself and say to yourself, hey, okay, yep, all right, I'm going to go back and look at it, make sure that because habit becomes what's real. And so if you've missed something over and over again, even if it's minor, and all of a sudden it becomes major, right? So engage that brain before you engage your weapon, right? Whatever that weapon is. And then being a lifelong learner. And I think I've kind of nailed it on the head, right? Reading Mattis's books are going to give you that. They're going to give you the insight to those types of stuff. But whatever it is, right? Look at it, join a group, read a new book. Lion's Guide is a great way to pull some stuff down, right? If leadership is your thing, and that's probably why you're here, right? Then what can you do? Little bits, increment over and over again, make you a better person. You don't need to you don't need to implement all 5 of these. You don't need to take these and Powell's and go, man, I'm going to do these tomorrow. That's not how it happens, right? It takes time, it takes consistency, it takes transparency, it takes commitment, right? All those types of stuff it needs to. So listen, sorry I can't be with you guys tomorrow as I am recording this on Wednesday. Sorry I can't be in my little office of everything else too. But I'm glad you came by. I'm glad you stopped in today to watch this when you actually watch it tomorrow when it posts. But everyone's thanks for joining the Flipside today. Would look to see you the following, not tomorrow, Thursday, but the following Thursday when Dale and I are back on. And we're going to talk second part of Man in the Arena. So we're super excited to cover the second half of Man in the Arena, the Tom Brady thing. And then at the end of the month, still have James Tyler coming on. Going to be super excited to see him talk small business and kind of talk about some things that he's seen at a small business level for leadership stuff and see how that goes. So thanks for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. And as always, flip out, guys.